Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and if you are new to this podcast, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, and share. Let's jump right in. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. I have an amazing guest speaker with us today, Tessa. Tessa is dedicated to empowering and creating an atmosphere where people can become more confident and more balanced. She believes in giving people the opportunity to shine authentically without fear or anxiety and cultivate meaningful relationships with themselves and with others. Her story is so inspiring, and I'm so thrilled to have her here with us. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's always humbling to get an introduction like that.
Yes. How are you this morning?
I'm really good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day in between all the craziness that you have going on to sit with me and open up a little bit about your backstory and all of the wonderful things that your life has taught you throughout the way. I love bringing women on with stories like yours because it just gives so many women hope, as they're going through their stuff, as they're going through their junk and their darkness and their challenges, to know that it is possible. It is possible to come out the other side and to be smiling and to find joy again and happiness. And sometimes it doesn't seem that way when you're in the funk. So yeah. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Of course. So one of the things that I want to start out with this morning is kind of just a little bit of your backstory. I would love for you to start out, kind of telling us a little bit about your past and maybe some challenges you went through that helped set you up for the journey that you're now on.
Yeah, thank you. And it was so interesting when you asked that question, and even what you're saying now is because, like everyone in life, I've had my challenges, but sometimes hearing other people's stories, I often felt that I was, nothing majorly bad happened to me, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, some things, if I would tell people, they go, oh my God, they were challenges, but then I always felt sometimes nearly hesitant to share them because I felt, other people have experienced things that seem so much worse. So how can my challenge, there was an element of guilt nearly of I shouldn't have felt so bad about these things because it could have been way worse and other people experience much worse things than I have. Yet and that's actually one of the things, both for myself and for others, that I now help with, that, your feelings are valid. Like whatever happens to you, however small or big it is, how you feel about it, you can't help that. You feel about it that way. And so some of the challenges that I experienced that kind of really touched me or influenced me were, for instance, coming from a broken home. And again, both my parents loved me. Both of them were involved in my life. So on the one hand, right, I didn't have a really bad childhood or growing up. And yet it really impacted me deeply to grow up with parents who were not together, and they separated when I was 6 months old. So I've never, ever experienced being part of a family unit really from that, beginning, if you like. And that did influence me a lot. Like a really silly example, maybe, that I remember being at a friend's house when I was 16 years old, and the father coming home saying hi to the wife and kissing her on the cheek and saying, how was your day? And I remember sitting open mouth like, oh, that's what that looks like. just not and the
Wow.
realization that we take something like that for granted, right? And again, it's not, I didn't experience child abuse or anything, but yet the impact of growing up like not having that, and how I remember my first relationship where I lived together, that I really nearly felt lost in the sense of, I don't know how to do this. I've not had the I mean, I've not experienced this. What am I supposed to do? So I think, challenges can be seemingly mundane nearly, if you like, yet they can really, really deeply impact you. And I think that's one that really comes to mind. And also there's been many, like I've gone through bad breakups, I've moved country, there's so many things but to me they all seem so small compared to what other people may have experienced, and yet I know how deep they can impact you, and that validation of that for yourself, right? That's so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I can actually totally relate to everything that you're saying, because even with my stories, and now looking at my stories, I actually feel like they're a lot more impactful. But I actually remember going to this training at one point, and we were supposed to go home and like make a phone call to somebody that we like weren't being authentic with or something, and open up and tell our real truth, and then come in the next day and share our story. And when we got to the class the next day, the teacher asked, like, hey, what were some things that you did last night that were like impactful, that really changed the trajectory of your life? Nobody raised their hand. And he's like, why is anyone raising your hand? Like, are you telling me that nothing happened? And I was in the front seat because I'm like brown noser, I always want to be the best, 100%er and all the things in my life. And I kind of said under my breath, no one feels like their story is good enough. And he heard it, somewhat. He goes, what did you say? And I said, well, nobody probably feels like their story is like good enough to be shared. And he's like, is that your experience? I'm like, 100%. I did my phone call, but I just don't feel like it's that impactful. And he made me stand up and literally yelled at me for belittling my own story, to the point where like I started crying. And he did it in a loving way. I shouldn't say he like yelled at me, but he very much reprimanded me for me, almost like as if I was two people. Like, how dare you not allow yourself to tell your story, And it hit me real hard. And it was at that point when I started to really recognize how important it was. And what was so funny is he made me share my story, and it actually related to like 12 or 13 women in the room. There was probably like 50 of us. And the hands just went up like crazy of people that totally related to my story. And the whole atmosphere changed because of my story. And I didn't think it was even that big of it was a big deal, but not exactly what you're saying, basically.
Exactly, because you see even now, you try to kind of say like that it wasn't such a big deal. You're nearly apologizing, right? Whereas like, and I think that's my biggest learning from that was as well that the shared experience, like you've mentioned it, inspiring other people with your story, it's less nearly about what actually happened than about how it made you feel. So although maybe like one person may have lost a loved one, or someone else, it's just, as a child, I remember losing my teddy bear, but the experience of that sounds awful, but it may have nearly been as bad, right? So I'm not saying, of course, I'm not comparing the two, but to anyone actually, be heard and seen in how you experience this without judging, is my event that I've experienced, is it worse or less bad than what you experienced, but the actual feelings you have. To have a space that that it doesn't matter what you experienced, but more how did you experience it, and can you be heard with that?
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with you. and understand where you're coming from 100%. There is something that I want to talk about with you. When we were on the phone and our initial conversation, you had mentioned a word that I would, or a set of words that I would love for you to kind of expand on. And the words were reactionary depression. So, first, is this something that you've experienced? And then, second, what is it?
Yes, is the first answer. And yeah, so I think this is one thing that it's one of these, like what we just talked about, in a way that from a very young age, I've always been very sensitive and I've struggled with anxiety on and off. And which again impacted also how I experienced different events. But then in my mid 30s, I had a breakup. And again, as I said, through these things, right? It wasn't, I wasn't married, we didn't have kids. So, it didn't seem that bad in a way, right? But for some reason, it hit me so hard that I couldn't stop crying. I didn't eat. Through my work, I went for counseling. And the counselor then she said, I hate the term, but you have reactionary depression, which basically means it's not like it's similar to clinical depression, but it's really a reaction to an event. So as a reaction to something that happens to you, it's like a little bit like, I don't know, it's like a traumatic event. But I was kind of, as I said, it's like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, it's a breakup. Come on, I mean, this happens to people, right? This is not, yet she said, yeah, but whatever you think it may be, or whether you think it's ridiculous or not, this is what you have. So you better, you need time to deal with it. And actually they, interestingly, they wrote me a sick note for work. She said, look, you don't, I give you, and I'll put down, the doctor actually was very kind as well. She said, the doctor said, I'll put down stress, really, that it's for stress.
Yeah.
Because that means you're allowed to do whatever you like, what gives you not stress. So, because at the time I worked for an organization supporting people with disabilities, which was a quite stressful job because our clients would be people that are in the worst situations. So you saw a lot of misery. So it was very impactful job as well. Although I liked it, I very much liked my job, but it was tough. But I also was self-employed already as a holistic therapist, and I did also coaching and healing. And she told me, she said, look, if that gives you joy, if you feel able for it, go for it, do it. If it doesn't, don't. But I give this note so that you don't have to go to your employed job, and you don't have to feel guilty about doing anything else, even if it's working for your own business. Because I felt like, well, that seemed a bit unfair, but said, no, it's stress relief. You need to do whatever gives you joy. And that was so powerful, even to get that permission.
Yeah.
To do what gave me joy. I was like, well, if I don't do this, then I shouldn't be doing that either, right? And she's like, no, just figure out what gives you joy. Anything that doesn't, don't do it. Anything that does, do it.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. So I have a question then. From what the definition that you just gave me, does that mean that there's probably a lot of people that actually have reactionary depression, but they're labeling it themselves because they haven't seen a doctor as just depression?
I'd say it could be, yes, because I think the difficulty as well, right? Like, I mean, as I said, I've never officially been diagnosed with depression, so I don't think I have it. I know there have been times in my life, as I said, I struggled with anxiety, but I think it's more linked to being high sensitive. So things affect me quite quickly. But because I've done a lot of practice around my own development and mindfulness and everything, I'm quite able to deal with things. But I think the difference is, like, people who suffer from clinical depression are obviously better to tell that story. But
Good point.
I think if I know that people always say that you never, it's not, you can't be cured from it, if you like, right? You can learn to live with it and you can manage it, but it's there in a way. And I think with reactionary depression, it's more it is more temporary in the sense like it's really like it's a sort of injury or backlash or trauma from that event, and then once you have processed that, then in principle it's no longer there. But the symptoms are exactly it. And I remember at the time, because my background is I'm a trained social worker. I've done, as I said, I've studied life coaching, I've done mediation, I've done conflict studies. So I really felt like I should just be able to manage this. And I think that was the powerful thing. And that's also, I think, for people when they experience something like this, the realization that it doesn't matter how good you are at whatever job you do or whatever you've studied, that you know what to do. It's not about that. Because it's your body, your psyche, everything has a reaction that you will have to accept you're having that reaction, right? You just, as I said, in my case, like as I said, I knew I this is what I helped other people with. I knew like exactly what I should be doing, getting, going outside.
Got it.
Doing everything. But I physically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, I couldn't do it. I just really, really couldn't. And I got even more angry and frustrated with myself because I felt like, well, this is what I do. So hearing someone actually kind of acknowledging that and again, that permission. I think that was so important, to get that permission and being told, look, don't be so hard on yourself. There's nothing you can do about this. You will have to go through it. Whatever way you do it, but you have to go through this. You cannot fix this.
Absolutely. I love that. And it kind of goes along with, you're allowed to feel your feelings.
Yeah.
For, however long it takes. Sometimes it takes a little bit.
Yeah. And I think even more so than being allowed to feel it, that also the message, and that was, to be honest, quite tough, that also there was like the only way through this, the only way to get out of this, not over it. I think that's also something, you can't get over it in a way, right? But to get out of it is to feel it. And
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Wait, to get out of it, not over it. I love that. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, it comes a little bit from my background with meditation and mindfulness, a lot of coming from Buddhist practices as well. But it really, really helped me that this was not something I had to fight. This was not something I had to overcome, that I had to get rid of or let go, as much as I wanted all that.
Yeah.
But that it was like, if you want to, as I said, get out of it or get whole again, if you like, you have to accept that this is here now, and you have to go through it. You have to feel it. Only by feeling it, by integrating it again, will you find that joy again as well. And I think but also, and I think that was very important too, there were many days at a time, and it still happens to me with other things now as well sometimes, that there is moments where you're just not able for it, right? There was times where this is too much. I felt like, obviously I wouldn't actually die from it, but it felt that bad that I was like, I cannot feel this right now. I'm going crazy. I can physically, emotionally, I cannot handle it, right? And then also the strength to say that it is okay to distract yourself, right? I always compare it to whatever work I do with people, for myself and for others, that I don't believe in quick fixes, and I don't believe in anything that's like a painkiller that you just suppress whatever's there. But sometimes you need it, right?
Absolutely.
I remember a meditation teacher of mine who said, I remember crying and saying, and I can't even meditate, I can't find any peace. He said, go watch Netflix for an evening. And but it was so powerful to say, hey, it's okay. You can, you're allowed to distract yourself a little bit, just knowing, don't use it as like, don't do it day in, day out all day long, right? Yeah. And I think that's the big problem that happens a lot, is that we take a painkiller, we do something to suppress it, and then we go, oh, that feels nice, let's leave it there. But
Yeah.
then it festers.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Do you think a person can ever fully heal from past trauma?
I loved that question when I saw it. And I think it's a tough one because I think, again, healing in a way, yes, but healing in the sense like I have how do you say, scar here.
Mm-hmm.
So the wound is healed, but the scar is still there.
Yes.
Right? So I think with trauma too, I think for me too, like with this, not just this breakup, but there's other things in my life, I always thought that healing meant that it was gone, that I had no feelings around it anymore, that I would be happy, would not feel any of the sadness anymore. But I've learned that it's not that. It's healing is that it has that you have in a way been able to give it a place, right? But
Yeah.
it is there. So actually for me, I see it as, again, right, that it's not something to get rid of or heal in that way, but that but the healing is that you can sit with, if for instance, if I have a memory of that time, I may still get emotional, right? But I
Yeah.
can feel it coming up and it goes again. So I see it as like that the trauma, whatever happened to you, is no longer living you in a way, right? So it's not no longer has it doesn't have you in its power anymore. You don't feel powerless anymore, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have effect anymore. And I think
Got it.
that is, and it's so powerful because I always thought happiness, right? We try, we want happiness in our life, and I
Uh-huh.
always thought it meant that happiness would mean that you would never feel pain or real sadness. And I think one of my biggest learnings was to realize that the happiness is that I can actually feel the sadness, the pain,
Yes.
without the overwhelm. But it's not an absence of pain. Like pain is part of life, but I don't have to suffer from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
100% agree with that statement. Absolutely. What are some steps that you've taken to get to the point where you are now? Mentally, emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in a way I've been lucky. I'm from the Netherlands, and that's where I live now again. And I lived in Ireland for 15 years. But in the Netherlands, even when I was young, it was pretty normal to get help, also professional, if you needed it. So I've never struggled really with reaching out for getting, like even talking to a counselor or something. And I do think that has helped me. So I've in my life, even when I think I was 16 years old when I first spoke with a counselor because I really struggled in school with bullying and then dealing with my parents being separated. So I think that's one of the biggest steps as well, to actually talk to someone when you really need it. And that difference between as important as it is to talk to friends and family, I think it can be really, really beneficial to talk someone outside who is objective, but also whose job it is to really sort these things out, right? Who won't say, there, it will all be fine, or talk to you like the things you want to hear, who challenge you a little bit to really, deal with what you need to deal with. And I think another big step was really like, and this is an interesting one. I've always done a lot around self-development, but I think in my younger years, in my 20s, in a way, I did it with the wrong intention, in the sense that I wanted to be good. I wanted to be better. And although it helps when you want to be a better person, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that per se. I think it can sometimes result in all the time seeing what you're not doing right. So I remember a breakthrough, and I can't remember where or how I learned that, but when I read somewhere where it said, taking responsibility for your own life, or owning up, owning your happiness or anything else, has nothing to do with taking blame. And for me, that actually caused one of the biggest shifts in my personal development, my spiritual development, that I realized, oh wait, this idea of you choose to be happy, and all these other comments that you hear, because they made me always feel so bad. Because, like, for instance, when I was depressed after the breakup, I always felt, well, what am I doing wrong? Because I don't feel happy. So I'm clearly doing something wrong, because everyone is telling, you read it everywhere. It's like, oh, if you want to be happy, you can choose to be happy. And I was like, well, I'm definitely not choosing not to be happy. Surely that's not my choice, right? So
Yes.
if I can see this idea of taking ownership and responsibility, but what am I doing wrong? Because surely then I should now feel happy. And that realization that taking ownership was not about blame. I'm not saying I'm never doing it anymore, but it really was the start of that practice of really seeing myself as the creator of what I'm experiencing, but also realizing that when I experience sadness, or when I experience depression even, or anything, that it's not my fault.
Got it.
That yes, that I have the power to make choices to change things, but that it's not, oh well, that I feel bad now means that's my fault because I could choose to be happy. But rather than that, to see, yes, I can choose to take steps, but what I feel right now, I'm not to blame for it. I can take responsibility for what I do next, but and that helped. And also, to be honest, that made me more tolerant towards others too, that to let go of this idea of blame within the ownership or responsibility. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. What do you think is the difference between being a victim and hiding behind a victim? Like the role of a victim?
Yeah. I think it's, for me, it's that difference between between victim and victimhood, if you like.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I always say, like, if something bad happens to you, like if someone does something bad to you, you are a victim of that, right? If there's a crime or a break-in or an assault or anything like that, right? Then you are a victim of an assault, or you are a victim of a break-in, or you're a victim of, you could be a victim of a natural disaster, it doesn't matter. But like something happens to you, right? But then it's how you deal with that, what happened to you, right?
Yeah.
And again, I really, really want to emphasize, because I've been there, that I felt so hard done by, or I felt so hurt by someone. So the feeling of being a victim is so natural, right? If something happens, if like, again, with a breakup, if someone did some really bad things to me, I've had a partner, like in the past, I have had a partner who cheated, or all this kind of thing. So in a way, I'm a victim of being cheated on. But then I also created a victimhood of poor me, and it was validated by people, right? Because anyone who knew would say, oh yeah, that's so terrible of that person, and oh, poor you, right? So it also gave me it gave me support.
Yeah.
And it gave me the feeling of, like, not like, oh, I'm in the right, but more of like, it gave me a safety of, like, this is not my fault, right?
Yeah.
I could, like, but it also disempowered me.
Yes.
Right? Whereas and also, there was also the fear of, because when I said, again, like, if I take ownership for not so much my part in that happening, in the bad thing happening, But if I take ownership in the whole relationship and where things were going, or in how I reacted to it, or what I do with that, right? Then it nearly felt as if by taking ownership again, it felt as if I diminished the sadness I felt about what happened to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was an element of wanting to stay that victim because that allowed me to get support. It allowed me to get the sympathy of other people, right? So, and if I was more strong and stood up, then it was kind of like, oh, well, clearly it's not so bad. So, off you go. And I think that can be very, dangerous to a degree, really, like to because staying there stops you again from, you talked about healing trauma. I think the staying in that victim role stops you from healing because you make yourself dependent and you make yourself reliant on people seeing you in that light.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if you step out of that, you can grow in your power. And I think that's so helpful. But I think to do that, you need to, again, realize to let go of that blame element, especially towards yourself, like seeing that let me give you, I know we spoke about this, I think, actually in our call, and I'm going to use the example because, as I said, I've never been actually abused, but I've been in relationships where things were not as they should be. And one of the things is around this taking ownership that when there is abuse in a relationship in any form, you are a victim of that abuse. You're in no way ever responsible for someone doing that at you, even if you're things of provoking and everything else, right? It's like, well, if I provoke someone else, they still should not hit me, right?
Yeah.
That hitting or whatever else is happening is still their responsibility and you're a victim of that. But if you want it to change, again, it is their responsibility. So if they are doing that, you cannot rely on them not doing it. You have a responsibility for how you deal with it. And what's the most powerful thing in that, and I've learned that also from just relationships that, weren't right, that there can be a long period where you feel unable to change it, right? Or where you feel, yeah, but it's not my fault, so I should not have to change anything, right? But if you, for your sake, want to change something, just focus on what do I need to either get out of this or to change things.
Got it.
Forget about the other person. That's their responsibility. You look after you and see what you need and find and see that if you take responsibility and if you make your choices that help you to change things or get out of it, that has nothing to do with you taking blame for any of it. It just means that you empower yourself to change things for you.
That makes sense. Why do you think it's so enticing to stay in that victim role?
I think if I look at my own examples, as I said, it was like for me, as I said, the shift really came when I stopped taking ownership with blame, because I thought if I in any way stop being the person who this happens to, if I start taking ownership of my own life and then that nearly takes away that this happened to me. Then nearly it becomes like, whereas as I said, when I learned that I could be, hey, look, this has happened to you, however much power you take, how much empowered you become, this still happened to you. You still, you can still feel bad about it without being a victim.
Yeah.
And also, the other enticing thing, as I said, is you get a lot of attention. As I said, I remember in situations where someone else did something bad to me, and if others would know, then they would sympathize with me, and I would get attention. And again, I wouldn't necessarily see myself as an attention seeker, but I'm not gonna lie. When something bad happened to me, And like, for instance, even the parents of that person would take my side. It felt good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I looked at it as in, it felt like, see, even they don't blame me for this. I didn't want
Yeah.
to be blamed.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Uh, so going along with that, you know, when we're in victimhood, when we're playing the victim and we're getting the attention that we need, or or feel like we need, what do you feel would be a good alternative? Because they have to drop, if you're going to move forward, you have to drop the victimhood, which
Yeah.
means, like, unconsciously they know that means they're not going to be able to talk about it anymore at that length and get the accolades that goes along with that. So I'm just sitting here talking to you and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I was a woman right now listening to us, and you're like, drop the victim thing and move forward and be joyful and
Mm.
happy, got it. But, like, how do I replace the joy and the happiness that I'm feeding off of from other people? Like, so I dry up this, cup. What's my first step in, like, filling up another cup to feel that, dopamine or joy or whatever that I'm getting from victimhood? Like, I don't want to dry up. So what's the first, what would be the first step that someone would take if they're listening right now?
Yeah. I think the first step is actually to see if you can have some people, and that can be a good friend. And again, if you need to, you can even do it through professional help as well. But I think to actually show people that regardless of what happened to you, you need their support. Right. And I think this is specifically after, again, I gave my own example of a breakup, but it can be other things, like something happens to you. And what you see is, in the beginning, people feel sorry for you and they'll do everything in their power to help you. But as soon as you seem to feel better, then people also assume you don't need their support anymore. So in a way, you need to stay down, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think if you can have, even if it's one or two good friends or family members or anyone where you can talk openly and say, hey, look, right, I want to get over this. I don't want to stay in this space of victimhood, if you like. But I'm afraid that when I become better, when I feel better, that, that's actually when I need you most, because then it's when I feel even more vulnerable. Because that's the time where I'm not okay, not fully okay yet. And so I think it's really important to try to build, and I know I saw some of your other podcasts of people who have certain specific events happening to them where there's peer support groups and stuff like that. So I think that can be really helpful, a place where you can really feel that you can still show up and you say, hey, I know I'm not a victim, or I don't want to be a victim, but I still want to be helped.
Yeah.
I still need people to hold me, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important to acknowledge that for yourself, because that's where it starts with, and then to actually see, can you find the strength to ask for it, even if it's only from one or two people, or through a support group, or some place where you can express this, where you know that you, in a way, as you say, without being the victim, you can still express those needs that you still have.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And this is really making me realize how you're almost becoming more vulnerable doing what you're telling them to do. Like, you're going to have to, you can't hide behind your story anymore. You're going to have to come in front of your story and actually say, like, hey, between my story and the journey to, like, finding peace, I'm, like, wide open here trying to find my way. So having that conversation could actually be even just as heart wrenching as going through the story, because now you're actually, like, trying to show that you're opening the wound, coming out of the wound, letting it heal and moving forward. And that space in between there is scary because you don't even know what it looks like. So having that conversation with somebody, like you said, is a great idea, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but you have, if you want to get to one place to the other, and have that cup being filled consistently, like you said, you're going to have to have that conversation. I love that.
Yeah.
And
And
I
I think,
agree
and
with
this
you.
is why we all need a space. Like, for me, what most recently, even for the work I do, I've said like that my real mission is to contribute to a world where everyone can feel seen, heard, and held. Right? Because I think we all need that.
Yeah.
But also we forget that we want it to happen without saying anything, right? And if you're lucky, you may have some friends or family who just read you like a book and just give it to you without asking. But I say that most of us have experienced that again, that you may sometimes have to actually, you have to break down your barriers. I remember that I thought to cope with any difficulty I ever had, I needed to board up, to put on a brave face, to show the world how strong I was. And I managed. I could do that for a long time, but I was crying inside. Right.
Yeah.
And again, and then if something bad happened, I would get that support. So in a way, it was really like, even here on this podcast, like I have no problem sharing any challenge or anything I've experienced in my life. That's what this is for. And I think it's helpful. But I think it's also really important, as you say, for people to realize that the thing is, tomorrow something tiny might happen that someone else thinks like, well, you shouldn't be so upset about that. It's not so bad. But if you feel that upset, you need a space where you can see that, where you can share that. And you need to be able to first be really honest with your own feelings. Like, one of the things that really helped me and that I also help other people with is to that kind of thing of that we all have feelings in certain situations that we think we shouldn't have. This may be resentment or resistance. Like, I work a lot with people who care for others. And one of the things is, when you care for others, not just professionally, or might be a family member, but also just if you really care about what happens in the world, if you're not also looking after your own needs, then what happens a lot is that you might start feeling resentment because you want that too. And if you're so naturally caring and giving, then sometimes it really hurts that other people, that you might not always get as much, or you feel you're not getting as much as that you give. So the thing is, though, that, some people are naturally empathic and naturally just see what other people need, but others, they may not be necessarily uncaring, but they might not just see it like that. So you may have to ask. So I think one of the most important things is learning to, first of all, ask for support, and that's in my case, I know that I found that the most difficult, and then accept other people's support.
Wow. Yeah. Speaking of that, what is one thing that you've learned throughout your journey that if everyone knew it, you kind of gave a little example there, but if everyone knew it, their entire life would change? Do you have any other nuggets that you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said before, like I think it's two things that I may have mentioned already a little bit before, but one is, again, that taking ownership has nothing to do with blame. Stop blaming yourself in the sense, and also don't stop blaming yourself, but notice when you are, and then remind yourself, like, fault doesn't matter, right? It's like, yes, it would be fantastic if the world changed and if other people did this or that, but what small step can you allow yourself to take to make you feel better, to look after yourself without worrying about whether someone else should do it or whether you're to blame or them to blame, but just for you,
Yeah.
And also that realization that I think actually maybe that's the most important thing. It's like looking after yourself is never selfish, because the better you feel, that is your gift in caring for the world as well. Just remind yourself, remember that if you walk into a room and someone shows you kindness or love or compassion, how much that gives you. So if you can manage to feel in a space where you feel happy or light or anything, right? And again, that doesn't mean that you never feel sadness or pain, but just when you can look after yourself so you feel good, even without doing anything for anyone else. Just think of how that impacts even just maybe your children, your partner, or just family or friends around. And then if you maybe just a kind gesture or smile into the cash register in the supermarket, that could change someone's life as much as doing something really big.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you could name off 3 things that you can think of to help pull somebody, or 3 things that somebody could do to pull themselves out of depression, what would you say those things are?
Yeah. And I just want to note with that again, as I said, if you're really suffering from
Thank you.
maybe clinical depression or anything, I think always seek, and I know you know, like, you
Thank
always
you
say
for
this
saying
well,
that,
of course,
though.
but to always seek help
Yeah.
as well, right?
Thank
Because
you.
there's certain parts that sometimes it's just impossible to pull yourself out. But I think regardless of what's happening, I have also in my work with people who were having actual psychiatric conditions, and even them, there's still things they can do to feel better too, right? With other help they're getting. I think it starts really, the very first thing is acceptance and kindness for yourself, right? That if you don't accept that you feel depressed, if you keep saying, yeah, but I shouldn't feel this way, or, oh, what I experienced, like, as I said, what I experienced isn't so bad compared to someone else. As long as you start resisting that this is how bad you feel right now, you won't do anything else. Because if I don't acknowledge that I feel this bad, why would I ask for help?
Yeah.
Right? If I don't acknowledge that I feel this bad, how can I give myself some kindness around it? So I think it starts with actually saying, okay, I feel, this is how I feel, right? And the kindness that it is okay. Doesn't matter what the reason is why you feel this bad. Again, whether you lost your teddy bear or whether, I don't know, your house got fire, it doesn't matter. You feel this way and that's okay. That's it. Just that one sentence. It's okay that you feel this way.
Yep.
And then I think secondly, it's, as I said, it's asking for help and accepting it. And that can be from a friend and family. It can be professionally, figure out, like, and if you don't know what you need, then find someone that you trust enough where you can say that and just say that, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what I need. I don't know what I need to do. I have no idea. But can you please help me figure it out, of care, or whatever way you need to say it? You don't have to have it all figured out what it is you need. Just ask. Right? Yeah. And that's very hard because it sounds so simple, but it really, I found that the most tough thing ever. And but it gave me the most. And I was surprised. I want to say this too, actually, that when I had the reactionary depression, as I said, when I couldn't eat or anything, when I had the courage to tell some of my friends, one of my best friends, she just said, okay, that's it. You come over for dinner or I come to your place and we'll eat together. And I ate 3 or 4 days in a week. Because when she was around, I would eat. But on my own, I wouldn't. And to accept that, because I felt bad, because I was terrible company. I just sat there in silence, sobbing away. And she said, doesn't matter. So allow people to help you. Yeah. There is people in your life who want to help you. And sometimes that might be your best friend, or it could be a neighbor, or it could be a stranger. It doesn't matter. But only if you ask, if you say that you need support, can they even offer you that help.
Good point.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And then lastly, it's the face it, own it, go through it. Whatever way, the days that you can't handle it, distract yourself. That's okay. But don't keep using painkillers. And I don't mean actual painkillers. I mean whatever kills the pain. Don't do that, because the festering, at some point you'll have to go through it. So find ways that you can sit with it. Again, whether that's with other people, support groups, professional support. But at some point, allow yourself to face it and own it.
I agree with those.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for those. How do you now decide to show up for your world?
I think as best as I can. I'm not saying I always manage, but I try to show up as honestly and authentically as I can. Like even today, I think my most important, I try to show up, is to show that I'm not perfect. That even, as I said, I'm a coach, I'm a social worker, all these kind of things, that my life is far from perfect, and that's okay. So, and also that, I think for me, it's very important that to be as compassionate as I can. And to also, again, to show I'm not perfect, so I'm not always compassionate to everyone all the time, and then that's okay too. But yeah, I think compassion for me is an important thing. I think to be part of that, like feeling seen and heard, I also am like, what I have, my big aim is that I recognize that when someone says or does something, most of the time I will have a judgment about that, right? In an instant. But I can choose to not act upon that judgment. I can choose to then take a deep breath and actually be compassionate, be open, and listen to them. I don't have to agree with someone to be understanding or be compassionate, but it only works if I have the honesty with myself that I do often have a judgment in the first instant, right? Because my practice is being non-judgmental, but I think that's in the actual dealing with someone. But I think the honesty is so important. So I try to show up like that as well with people, to really, to really show them that, like, I have all these feelings too. Like, there's no fairy tale of just take these steps and then you'll be forever happy. Life is messy. Life, you experience pain and sadness, but it can be also very enjoyable with all that.
Yes, absolutely. I would tend to agree with a lot of that, 100%, and I appreciate you showing us that it's not perfect. You're still, even in the journey, even in all of the education that you now have, there's never I shouldn't say never. There is times when there's doubt. There is time when there's still sadness. It doesn't matter. You said earlier in the podcast, going through reactionary depression, and you're like, I knew all the things that I was supposed to be doing and nothing was working. And it's important to realize that as humans, that there's always going to be stuff that pops up, and the key is to navigating your way through that and not staying in it for longer than you have to.
Yeah, and I think, but also with that, I think, and I want to add to that, because I think that's what for me, like that, don't stay longer than you have to, but also accept that if in this moment in time you don't know how to get out of it, it is okay too, right? Absolutely. That sometimes you just don't know what to do. So that sometimes it's not about what step can I take to get out of this, but it's more about taking, actually in a way, a step back and say, okay, I don't know what to do. So what do I need to find the courage, the strength to either do it myself or to ask someone to help me to do it, and to realize that, again, as I said, if you're in a really bad situation, people often say, well, why would you stay in that?
Yeah.
But sometimes you really don't know. So then don't be hard on yourself. Don't be hard on yourself if you don't know today. Then take whatever step, and maybe it takes a week or a month or even a year before you actually are able to remove yourself from that situation. But do whatever you need to say, hey, this is how I feel. That's okay. I'm allowed to feel this way, whatever the reason is. But now what can I do about it?
Mm-hmm. How will a person know? How do you know when you're done?
Done with.
I mean, how do you know when you're not playing into victimhood and you're actually done?
Yeah.
Grieving.
I think it's not linear.
Okay.
Like, I mean, as I said, like before, like for instance, my reactionary depression, like I would have had 10 years in before that, like, you know, when I struggled in my early 20s, and then I'd done a lot of work, and I really felt I was dealing with life pretty well, and that I was coping with things and managed, and then that happened, and it just all fell apart in a way, right? And then it built up. So I think it's also important to see that whatever work you're doing, like, you know, you asked earlier about healing, about trauma. If a certain trauma happens to me, I may feel that that's healed, but that doesn't mean that I will never ever feel trauma again, or that I will never ever experience the same thing again, right? You know, a lot of the time they often say in the journey as well, right? You keep coming in different situations. So I think with victimhood as well, if you practice being more self-aware and the self-acceptance, and if you have become pretty good at asking for help and accepting help and taking ownership, it doesn't mean that you manage all the time. As I said, I noticed, like, so I think for me, actually the most important thing to be able to not stay in that or fall into that is to practice really being conscious and aware in my life, so that when I sink into it, because it will happen again, I can guarantee that there will be many situations in my life where I notice and I go, oh, wait, there I'm going again. But the sooner I notice that, the sooner I can get out of it. So this comes back to that being open to actually also sit with those things you don't want to feel, either from yourself or from situations. So for me, I do this through my own personal practice. I practice meditation and other things. But for me, it really comes like this practice and awareness. And then when I hear myself say certain things, for me, it can be that if I notice that my partner does something and my main reaction to it is, well, and I go, oh, wait a minute. Right? Because even if he does, you know, maybe he gets, I don't know, you know, he gets easily upset about appliances not working and then shouts at them, which is pointless in my opinion. But I, you know, and this is the thing. So again, if I would tell someone, I could get sympathy and they say, oh yeah, that's just stupid of me, you know. But if I notice my reaction to it, why am I upset about that?
Okay.
Why is that hurting me?
Got it.
Right? So if I'm sensitive, like, yes, I can ask him to take in consideration my sensitivity. But if I feel that someone does something to me,
yeah,
it means that for some reason I'm not able to hold my space. And this is where that victimhood comes in. So if I realize, as I said, like, I have no control over what other people do. So if I realize that I feel hurt by someone, I need to realize, I need to see, okay, so what can I do, get out of that? And again, that doesn't mean I'm not asking other people. People often talk about boundaries, right? And they say, yeah, but surely someone should not do this and that. And I always say, you're totally right, right? I mean, if you see two kids playing and one hits the other, we think the kid should not hit the other. Yet, throughout life, we will all get hit, physically or emotionally or mentally. You know, we will get hit because not everyone acts according to how they should. So that it's so important to stay always aware of, okay, but what can I do? Because why like, would I make myself dependent on that another person won't do something? I have a choice. How do I deal with that, right? So I think for me, it's very much as soon as I see myself saying, oh yeah, but I can't help it because, I'm like, whoa, I may not be able to help the other person do that, but how do I want to deal with that?
Absolutely.
So
Wow.
that's, I think, the most, and I think for me, it's the awareness and it's kindness. I think that is really that, and that is the one that I struggled the most with, that not stay stuck in, oh yeah, I should be doing this. Yeah, I should not talk to myself like this. If you have negative self-talk, don't tell yourself you shouldn't talk to yourself like that. Recognize that you're talking like that. For me, I always see it, there's 3 steps. We get awareness. So we become aware of either our own feelings or what someone else is doing, or aware of the universe, if you like. It doesn't matter, but you create awareness, and then we want to take action, right? We want to change it. But if you go from awareness and you become aware, for instance, if I notice that I have feelings of, I don't know, like, feelings that I judge as being negative, if I want to change them, then I'm constantly looking at myself as like, oh, I do it again. Oh, I'm being critical again. Oh, I'm doing this again. Whereas if I can first accept and say, hey, in this moment in time, I'm being self-critical or being critical of others. And they go, no, but I'm always such a good person and I'm always so compassionate. So I don't do that. I don't judge. No, actually, you know what? In this moment in time, if I'm really honest, I am doing that. So I accept myself as being critical in this moment.
Wow.
But I do want to change it. So now, from that space of acceptance, of saying, hey, right now it's okay. This is happening. You're acting like this. You're feeling this. Now, what can I do about it? Then your actions become so much more compassionate to yourself as well. So I think that, to me, is the really big practice. And to recognize, I know for myself, I need mirrors, I need community, I need support, because sometimes I don't see it for myself, or I don't want to see it. So I need to be able to say, okay, show me. And then I have days where I go, okay, but today I'm going to watch Netflix because today I don't want to visit.
Oh, that's great. That's great. This has been amazing. Amazing. I so appreciate everything that you shared. I want to know, for myself and also for the audience listening either live or on the replay, what do you have going on, business wise, personal wise, as far as, the next 2 to 5 years?
Yes, when I saw your questions, what are you going to do in the next 2 to 5 years? It's so funny. Gosh, it's 2 weeks ago or so now. My mom gave some books that she made notes in from when I was a kid, things I said, things I did. And when I was around 10 years old, she asked me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I answered, how would I know that right now? Because I'm not grown up yet. So for my personal life, I don't have any big plans at the moment. There's no big changes coming. I would love to visit some friends in Australia, but and I'm hoping that will happen in between now and 2 or 5 years' times. But who knows at the moment?
Yes.
But I don't have anything. I don't know. There's nothing happening. So and I have learned to kind of go, like, I make plans, but also go with the flow and see, and kind of go like, well, I don't know where I'm into 5 years' time, so I'll see what I want then.
Yes.
But for business, you need to plan a bit better. So one of the big changes that has happened in my business from when I lived in Ireland, and I did all kinds of holistic therapies, is that I went more into a coaching role, but more like I see myself more as a guide than a coach. Like I prefer to, other people say they see me more like that. And I've created in the last couple of years, I do both one-on-one work with people, but also I'm more and more going towards the community. And I ran a pilot earlier this year around embracing your life, embracing your essence. And from that, one of my students, he said, it's not really a program, it's a movement. And I got very humbled by that, but also realized how much I would really like to build it more. So now my main focus is to really support people who serve others or who care for others. At the moment, it's mainly people who work with other people professionally, but I've also some people who do it more in their personal life, or who just feel that they want to contribute to a better world and want to care in one way or another for people or for the world for that matter. But really, I'm in the process of kind of shifting it a little bit. At the moment, the membership consists of a monthly conscious conversation where we come together, we pick a topic. Last month was actually authenticity. Next month will be vulnerability, where we explore that topic and how that impacts in your life and where you're struggling with it and how you can practice it. And then for people who want to go deeper, I organize guidance sessions where you get really more deeper coaching on really situations in your life where that is happening, and more personalized practices as well of how for you personally, you can work with that. And also there's meditation and reflection sessions where we practice specific meditation, awareness practices that really help you in general with living more consciously, living more aware, but also to go through that process of awareness, acceptance, and action. I'm in the process of kind of building into, I want to find a way to really create a very supportive community, as I said, where people feel embraced, where people feel they can be heard, held, seen between each other, but also with some guidance, because I do think it can be really hard to go through this process. So basically conversations like we had now in a way is happening as well for people. But as I said, for me, for the next couple of months and years, it's really about building that and seeing in which way, what kind of model works best for people. So my vision is to have a bigger community where everyone can come together in these, as I said, conscious conversations, and then have smaller circles. And because I have a background in also working with people with dementia, people with disability and other things, I know from my work with them the struggle that a lot of family carers and professionally carers, like in care homes and things like that, would have had. So I can envision that there may also become specific circles for like either for family carers or professionally carers, specific for coaches. But I also want to make sure that people connect together as well, because although I do think it's good to have people together who go through the same thing, at the same time, as I said, we all have a different experience, and sometimes we can really learn. And especially, for instance, for family carers and professional carers, sometimes to actually hear each other's stories, that they actually also open up and see, oh, you know, as a family member, for instance, that you realize, oh, wait, these people, although they get paid to look after this person, they actually care with their heart and they also struggle. So it could also be a really good way, I think, for people to feel even more supported in their struggles. Because as I said, again, when you care for others, you may forget your own needs, and you may forget, and also you need a place where those feelings that you judge as negative, for instance, when you care for others, and sometimes there might come some resentment about the things that you can't do because of that, that you have a space where you feel safe, that you can actually face and own those feelings too, and that you can see that, you know, it's okay to feel that too. You're allowed to feel that, and that doesn't mean you're not a good carer. It doesn't mean you don't give, you know, the world about that person, but you know, that also needs space.
Yes. As far as, you know, speaking to our audience and anyone who's listening, so speaking to them, and then also speaking to your 20-year-old self, looking back, what would you say? What would you say to your 20-year-old self?
I looked it up and I thought, what would I say? I think the main thing I wrote it down because I think it was so pertinent, that it said, you do not have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out.
Yes.
Not for yourself, right? There is no end line. As I said, because I know when you do self-healing or when you do a healing journey, sometimes you think, when will I be there? And the first time I heard someone say, well, there is no there. Your whole life is going to be a learning journey. First, I was like, oh my God, no. I want to get to the end. I want to, you know. But then I realized the beauty of that. So I think when you realize that that the journey is the gift in a way, but also you are the gift. As I said, you owning your own journey, you doing this healing, whether it's for yourself or for others, that is the gift. You don't have to be perfect. I remember in one of the trainings I did, the coach and healer, he said like, there is this thing of like a wounded healer. And it's not just about, oh, I've gone through this so I can help you, but it's more that when you own your wounds, and you see, as I said, there's nothing to overcome or go through these. Who you are right now includes all the good and the bad things and all the healing and all the pain and everything you've done. So there is nothing to fix. This is who you are right now, whether that's when you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100. Everything you are right now, that's your gift for yourself and for others.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I loved everything that you shared today. I thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to sit down with me and to sit down for those that are with those who are listening. Do you have any closing thoughts?
See, and here's my own imperfect self that I go, oh gosh, I hope I wasn't rambling on too much. So that's one thing I want to show people, that, as I said, like, I love talking about this, and I'm so appreciative of your questions and of holding this space. And yet there's still my own inner doubts as well, right? So
thank you for opening up and sharing that.
Yeah, I think I want to say that. And for the rest, I just want to say I'm so grateful for you organizing like these talks, because I think, as you said, every story matters, right? Every experience matters. So yeah, I think it really is like, keep being you, whoever you are out there, just, and know that this is one thing. One last thought is maybe this, that realizing that you are you in relation to yourself, to others, the world, and you can change. You don't have to, right? You are good as you are, and yet you have all potential for growth.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, like I said, and for taking some time. I almost feel like I'm going to rewatch this and take some notes, because some of that stuff was just so good, and some of it I hadn't necessarily heard in that way before. So I always appreciate, a new perspective on life. So thank you for that. So I'm going to close up here. Thank you so much for joining us here on Her Version. If you have an amazing story to share of struggle to triumph, be sure to reach out to me here or at herversion.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I am so grateful to be sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others. Have an amazing day. Much love.